Can we do this for another 10, 50 years together?
Hello and welcome to again another review video of a Verstappen Red Bull RB16b model from the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Yeah, I know, again the same car. Believe me, I'm frankly getting tired of looking at that car too, but for this model here, I'll make the exception. So on the table here is the Spark Resin Scale 1/12 version of the 2021 Red Bull Honda, and oh man, let me tell you, this one is really something different, so let's not wait any longer and get right into it. Spark announced a few months ago they would be making 1/12 scale versions of the 2021 Max Verstappen Red Bull RB16b. They now released two versions, the Dutch Grand Prix winner and this Abu Dhabi Grand Prix winning car. In the next few weeks, a Turkish Grand Prix version, the one with a rather fetching Arigato Honda livery, and a Monaco Grand Prix winner will be available too. These are all limited editions, albeit in a different number. The Monaco Grand Prix car will be 321 pieces, the Dutch Grand Prix one is 512, and both the Turkish and Abu Dhabi Grand Prix are limited to 2021 pieces each. The models are also individually numbered, there's a small plaque of it on the back of the base. The model then comes in a pretty standard cardboard box, nothing special to see really. There is just a small sticker on it revealing it's a Red Bull Racing model. Inside it's snugly packaged to mainly protect its display case. Yes, indeed, this model comes with a display case too, just like the 1/18th version. The unwrapping part of it is quite tedious, there's a whole lot of plastic sort of cling film wrapped around it. It's also a good thing though, as it protects the Perspex case of course. The case itself is also wrapped in another layer of plastic film. Underneath then is a mousse protective frame to keep it from rubbing onto the base. The base plate itself then is quite simple and similar to the 1/18th model. Only here the model info is on a plaque in front of the car and it's not printed on. The main first impression is that it really is a big model car. Of course, you could already tell by the size of the box it came in, but it's really a whole lot bigger than I had anticipated. I already own some 1/12 scale Formula 1 models like the Senna 1990 McLaren by Minichamps, which I reviewed on this channel before by the way, so I thought I knew what to expect, but this is really something different. Now let me show you how that McLaren stacks up against the Red Bull. It's almost as if it's in another scale. This is again a fine example of how enormously big Formula 1 cars have become these days. The sheer size of the whole thing is really something to get used to. Here is another comparison now pitched against its smaller sister, let's say, the 1/18th version from Spark as well. I mean, look at how much bigger the whole display is. With Spark being the manufacturer of both scale model cars, you would think that this 1/12 version is just the same as the 1/18th but bigger, but that's not the case here. This 1/12 model is a lot more detailed than the 1/18th, which I think is logical as there is more room to make finer details. It's not simply an upscaled version of the 1/18th, and this is something you notice right away. In fact, it's almost as if it's made by a totally different manufacturer. So as I said, this big scale model car is really something different to the smaller one, and this is noticeable when talking about the level of detail, but there are also some parts that are just completely different from one version to another, regardless of the scale difference. One example are the wheel nuts. The ones on the 1/18th version were the wrong shape and also the wrong color, with a red cone on the left side and a green one on the right. And here on the big car, they are actually the right shape and color. There were no different color wheel nuts on the real car. Another example is a steering wheel. On the big scale, Spark have finally made a real Red Bull steering wheel. The one on the 1/18th model is just a generic one Spark always uses. And the same goes for the helmet, which again is a generic one on the 1/18th model. The one on the 1/12 scale is actually molded after the real Schubert helmet Max uses. This metallic colored piece on the floor then is also different. It is featured on the 1/18th car, which is not accurate. The floor on the big model doesn't have that mistake on it. Also in the diffuser there are these two white color streaks underneath the 1/18th model. The 1/12th model doesn't have those white pieces, which is the correct interpretation. All the other differences I noticed are mainly because of the increase in size, which then of course means a bigger playing field to add or refine some details. Since I really liked the 1/18th model and this 1/12 version is basically an upgrade on almost every level, are there any cons then too? Well, unfortunately there are, although I have to say there aren't many of those. The worst one by far for me though is the detailing on the front wing cascades elements. These are actually all cut out for once, which of course is not a con but a major positive note, but the small pieces in between, the slot gap bridges let's say, are lacking any fine details. Here they are just simple rounded pieces in the same material as the front wing itself. Instead these should be fine metal parts, and in fact the 1/18th version even has these more detailed metallic parts, so yeah, what the hell is going on here? The only explanation I can think of is that these are stress points needed to make sure the structural integrity of the wing is kept in place because of all the cutout elements. But yeah, still, this does feel like a missed opportunity, especially since it is featured on the smaller scale. Since we're looking at the front wing, I also think the height is not entirely correct. It looks a bit too high up, and this is something Spark does struggle with sometimes. Another thing I find a bit disappointing is the tread of the tires, and more precisely the way they are scrubbed. I don't know if they did that to give it a raised look or not. It seems to me that they actually worn them down to get rid of the seam in the middle of the tires, but as you can see on the model here, they didn't do a thorough job then. It's still quite visible in places. I also think because of all the scrubbing, the wheels are a bit too light color-wise then. They look somewhat grey and dusty. One more thing I noticed is missing are the small dots on the rear wing planes, and this was something the FIA added to all cars to measure the amount of flex the rear wings had on the load. And since Red Bull was the, well, let's say instigator of this directive, it's a shame that that small but significant detail is missing here. Finally then, the rear suspension is actually totally wrong. This was also the case on the 1/18th version, something I wasn't aware of until a subscriber pointed this out in part 3 of this series. And this was actually quite important in real life, as it contributed hugely to the success of this car. Basically what is wrong is the geometry of the lower wishbone. This arm here should be going around the back of the pull rod and attached to the bodywork in another position. Now I know these are all small details that maybe a lot of collectors won't even notice or mind, they aren't entirely correct, but I just wanted to point them out. I don't think these are deal breakers either. So the front wing and the rear suspension are far from perfect, but I think this is actually a very good model car. One of the best pieces are the wheels of the car. This sounds a bit contradictory as I mentioned that I didn't like the tires in the previous part, but the sidewalls are actually very good. These textured lines on it look really nice and make for a more realistic look. The detailing on the rims is very good too. A small tire valve has been added with a small red decal indicated where the valve is located. I already showed the wheel nuts when comparing it to the 1/18th car. They are the same on all 4 wheels on this version and they look very nice, I think. The detailing behind the wheels then is also quite impressive. The brake disc housing is clearly visible and is decked out in this fan-like texture. The Brembo brake calipers can be seen too, with a small temperature gauge sticker on it. The rear wheels then are equally impressive with this ribbed rim. Again, there is a small tire valve with corresponding decal. And here too the wheel nut is very detailed. So yeah, the wheels, even though the tread of the tire is not perfect, are very good, I'd say. The cockpit area then is another really good looking part of the model. The driver figurine is not bad, although I think the color of the driver's suit is a bit on the light side. The belts are maybe just plastic ones, but they are nicely detailed with these metallic photo etched buckles. What is really impressive on the figurine is the helmet. As I mentioned in the differences part of this video, the helmet here is made to resemble the Schubert one Max uses, and I think they've done a terrific job on it. The shape looks on point and the details on it are pretty good. I really like the small lip spoiler on the chin guard, the small vent details, the visor detail, the top air vents, and the typical spoiler on the back. Even more impressive is that the hands device, you can see it underneath the belts, and it's actually attached to the helmet via these straps. I mean, that's a real impressive piece of detail. The cockpit details just don't stop there. The steering wheel is another thing that impressed me. Given that Spark normally uses a generic shaped wheel for the 1/18th models, I was surprised to see they have actually modeled the real Red Bull wheel for this big scale car. It looks quite accurate too, down to all the buttons and switches, and the correct decals on top of the wheel and at the back as well. The detailing behind the wheel then, with the gear shift pedals and the quick release mechanism, also looks pretty nice. I also noticed these clamps on the cockpit headrest. I mean, that's again a very impressive small detail. On the left side of the cockpit then, there are two decals visible on the side of the cockpit. A triangular warning sign and the track map of the Yas Marina circuits. Below these decals there is a small console that is barely visible, and I think this controls the MGUH settings. I'm not really sure, but it's really nice to see this replicated on a model car. All over the model then, there are some nice refined details too that I'll quickly glance over. Beginning at the front, the cascades of the front wings are all cut out as I mentioned, but yeah, it looks really good I think. The distinctive nose tip is also nicely modeled. The big carbon fiber cape underneath the nose looks great as well, with this small gap in it and then the upright turning vane at the end of it. Above it you can actually see the inlets of the S-duct in the nose. On the top of the tub then, these small winglets here are pointing in the right direction for once. And the fine antennas and typical Red Bull style pitot tube together with the 360 camera, they all look very detailed. The barge boards then are amazing looking I think. Just like on the 1/18th version, most of these small parts are all cut out. All of these gills on the side vanes, let's say, are cut out too. And the rest of this aero construction in front of the sidepod intakes is all very refined. The complex mirror arrangement looks nice too. I really like the small details like this tiny flick up on the side of the halo, and the way this sort of blade wing underneath the airbox is modeled. On the sides of the airbox engine cover there are these two fine red pull rings, and I'm very happy they've added this detail, as normally on the 1/18 scale they're just a decal or they simply skip it. The floor detailing then is very nice too, with these 5 curved upright turning vanes here. All these horizontal pieces look great as well. They're all individually layered and end in these 2 upright guiding vanes. The floor edge of course has this aggressive cut in it, which was one of the new for 2021 rules. In front of the wheels then, there are even more fine aero parts that are very nicely modeled. And this small metallic strengthening rod coming out of the sidepod is a very nice little detail too. The rear of the model then is also very good. The rear wing has 2 different main planes, although it's actually barely visible. There is a very narrow opening between the 2 upper elements, as you can see by my paper test, let's say. The DRS actuator then looks nice with this carbon texture on it, and it connects to this big shroud covering the exhaust pipes. The end plates of the rear wing then have all the gills in it cut out like on the 1/18th version. Underneath the diffuser then are all these vertical strakes, and they actually have a serrated bottom which looks very aggressive. The rear light then is also nicely detailed at the end of this crash structure. So even though they didn't do the small details on the front wing cascades, I think Spark did their best to make sure the rest of the car is detailed enough. There's lots to see actually on a model car that big, and I think they've done a good job of keeping you entertained. So what is my take now on this big scaled model car? Well, let me start by saying that I like it. It's a shame there are some inaccuracies, and the lack of extra detail on the front wing is a bit disappointing, only because the 1/18th version does have these small metallic parts. The front wing height as well keeps on giving Spark some headaches, but I mean, it doesn't look like a tractor either. Some of the details that are very good include the helmet. the cockpits and the wheels. And these do really make this model car look great, I think. The burning question, of course, is do I think it's worth the €700 price tag? I think it does in a way. It's a lot of money, yes, but you get a lot of model car for it. To give you an idea, that 1/12 scale Minichamps McLaren I showed before was €400. The Red Bull, of course, is a lot more detailed, as Formula 1 cars are just more complicated these days. It's also a lot bigger, and of course comes with a display case. So yeah, if you add all of these things up, I'd say it's about the right price. It's not quite at the level of an amalgam model, of course, but a model from that brand will set you back €900 to €1,000, and that's for 1/18th version. And none of the amalgams also feature a driver figurine. So to conclude then, I'd say this model car is the best one out of all the ones we've reviewed in this series. Well, it's no miracle that it is, as it's bigger and much more expensive too. I don't think it's for everyone though, only because of its sheer size, so you need a lot of space to be able to display it nicely. However, I think the ones who will get one won't regret buying it. This big scale model would for sure make a nice centerpiece of the collection of any Red Bull or Max fan. So we've come to the end of this fourth part and the end of this series of reviews of the Max Verstappen Red Bull RB16b. Now I would like to ask you, which one do you think is the best and why? Let me know in the comments below. So thanks again for watching this review of this 1/12 scale Spark model, or maybe even the whole series. Leave a like down below if you enjoyed it. Check out my other review videos too on the channel, and if you haven't done so already, why not subscribe to it? In the meantime, take care, and I will hopefully see you again in the next one.